Chapter 12. 2 weeks passed in a flash, and at last the day of the wedding arrived. Supermati grew increasingly in love by the hour. Nara's intellect and beauty captivated and intoxicated him. He did not even notice that the young woman was gaining more and more influence over him. At Nara's request, an elderly Protestant minister was to consecrate their marriage before an altar arranged in the large hall and decorated with exotic plants. With a beating heart, Supramati knelt on the purple cushion beside his bride, who had never seemed so enchanting to him. Indeed, Nara looked like a marvelous vision, with her long veil and a garland of unknown flowers resembling lilies, only smaller with phosphorescent cups. Her face was serious and focused. Supramati thought she was praying with fervor. The evening passed joyfully. The guests, of course unaware that two immortals were being united, warmly wished the newlyweds a long life together, up to their diamond anniversary. At 10 o'clock, the guests departed and the young spouses went to their rooms to change. An hour later, the happy Supramati walked into the master bedroom, furnished with imperial luxury. It was a large room upholstered in white satin. When Supramati entered, Nara was still seated before the lace dressing table. She wore a peignoir of Indian fabric with wide open sleeves, and the maid was finishing arranging her magnificent hair, which, like a wandering moonbeam, spilled in silky waves even onto the carpet. At her husband's entrance, Nara rose, dismissed the maid, and sat on the sofa, smiling and extending her hand. Supramati knelt and passionately kissed his young wife. Nara returned the kiss and then asked with a mischievous look, "Now that we are twice consecrated, would you like me to tell the story of my life, which interests you so much? First of all, I no longer wish to hear the formal you from your lips. And then, to speak frankly, however interesting your past may be, I prefer the present, and an hour of love is worth an hour of revelation," he answered half laughing, passionately. There they are, men, in all their naive egoism. The satisfaction of their personal self always comes first, Nara replied, blushing slightly, which added a special charm to her always pale and translucent face. Supramati wanted to reply, but suddenly trembled and turned pale. It seemed to him that a head appeared from behind the drapery, and Narayana's black eyes glared at him with diabolical malice. "Calm yourself, Supramati. The sight of Narayana should not frighten you, and in my presence you have nothing to fear," said Nara, drawing him onto the sofa. Then she rose and made a gesture in the air. Immediately, before Supramati's astonished eyes, a shining cross appeared like a moonbeam. "Look, this is the sign of white magic, which serves as an insurmountable barrier to any unclean spirit. To evoke it, one must at least have passed the first degree of the highest initiation," Nara said, sitting back on the sofa. "A sorcerer can only create a pentagram, which the magician wears on his chest as a visible sign of his absolute power over black magic defeated by the cross. This cross, you say, serves as a barrier to unclean spirits. But could Narayana really be so unclean? And how did you know he appeared to me?" Supramati muttered, running his hand over his damp forehead. "I sensed his presence occultly. Narayana was a notorious criminal. From a scientific point of view, he was a mediocre sorcerer, but an important element for the subordinate elementary spirits, as he possessed a precious essence that could animate them, giving them vitality without physical embodiment. Narayana abused corporeal life. He obeyed neither fasting, nor abstinence, nor rest, necessary for one who wishes to subdue the ranks of lower beings. Yet he wanted to live and enjoy without interruption and could do so, as he had nothing to fear from fatigue, and his inexhaustible life juice replenished all losses caused by excess and immoderate excitation of all vital functions. He could boldly expend his life force without fear of depletion, but such excess attracted and excited larvae and suffering spirits, which he brought into contact with himself through invocations. Narayana's physical power replaced the spiritual power that even a sorcerer must possess to conquer the unclean throng surrounding him. Thus, merely by his presence, he aroused all evil instincts and unsatisfied passions in the lower, unpurified spirits that still resonated in their astral bodies. The powerful currents emanating from him in some way materialized them, creating a formidable army around him that followed at his heels, clinging to him and dragging him into all sorts of madness, wishing to enjoy themselves through him. Since Narayana lacked the energy and patience to undergo the severe school of abstinence that would have made him master of these evil spirits, he became their slave and was rendered unable to fight them. To rid himself of his pursuers, he had to die, taking the life essence again mixed with decaying blood. Yet he fully died only when the magical sword of the eldest of the brothers of the Round Table of Eternity finally severed the bonds tying him to the body. In that case, if I also take the life essence, do I risk facing the same danger? Supramati asked fearfully. Yes, if you live as Narayana did. The life essence you see is a double-edged weapon. This mysterious juice, animated by abstinence and the discipline of senses and will, acquires terrible power and can activate forces and laws whose existence you cannot even imagine, yet constantly mixed with coarse matter. This juice acquires crude and tyrannical power, which ends by destroying the one who fails to subjugate it to himself. You still do not clearly understand what I have said because you do not know the beings that hide from human sight in the ether, which seems so transparent and pure. But remember what you saw in the old castle on the Rhine when you so imprudently struck the copper disc in Narayana's laboratory. When the vision vanished, you saw how around the magic circle drawn on the floor, there crawled repulsive creatures that would have destroyed you if you had been in ordinary conditions of existence. Narayana amused himself by evoking beings of that sort or others, more elevated yet wavering and imperfect, and held orgies with them unknown to mortals. Gifted with clairvoyance, I saw those repulsive creatures feeding on the mighty vitality of that man, inspiring him, pushing him to crime, and enjoying themselves through his mediation. Often in one of the empty halls of his palace, he gathered a company not of the living but of the dead, and at times, with his usual cynicism, he went at night to some lonely cemetery. There he lit on a tripod certain perfumes mixed with a drop of the mysterious essence, and amused himself watching how from under the gravestones there emerged beings to whom he granted a fictitious vitality. These beings, at the last breath of the aroma, scattered into space and fell back into their former state of wandering spirits. But in their souls, Narayana awakened an insatiable thirst for life. In vain did I implore him to abandon that horrible and criminal game. He laughed at my advice and found it quite piquant to have the ability to possess any woman, living or dead, who had the misfortune to please him. No, if I were to tell you all the criminal fantasies he invented, you would think you were hearing a tale from the 1001 Nights. Thus, in the last century in Naples, there lived a famous singer whose voice Narayana loved to hear. I do not know how this woman died. I thought his infatuation with her had ended, but Narayana judged otherwise. He obtained the girl's body and placed it in a hiding place he had prepared everywhere. Whenever he fancied, he lit on the ever-ready tripod a mixture of perfumes and the original essence, materialized the unfortunate being, and made her entertain him with singing. One day Narayana was away. I happened by chance into that secret room, still saturated with the dreadful perfumes, where a being, half spirit, half living person, was writhing in unbelievable torment, bound by infernal power to the decaying body. I cannot either live or free myself from this horrible body, the unfortunate one complained. I immediately took every measure to release her. First, I opened the windows to destroy any aroma. When the corpse, touched by the fresh air, resumed its icy immobility, I destroyed it with electric fire, which I possess and know how to use. I placed the ashes in the chapel, and on the spot where I had found the body, I traced an astral cross to prevent Narayana from pursuing the soul of this poor woman again. This act of mine cost me the stormiest conjugal scene, but I had grown accustomed to them. I do not know, Supramati, whether you clearly understood what I have told you. All these strange laws and properties of the primary matter are so hard to recount, but when you begin your initiation, Tahir will explain everything step by step. Yes, Nara, I understood you. Even if I do not clearly explain to myself how all these occult phenomena occur, I have nevertheless read enough about larvae, vampires, and apparitions to know what strange and terrible mysteries lie in the afterworld. The path I have entered, and the heavy ordeals with which I must pay for Narayana's treacherous gift, fill me with horror. One thing remains an impenetrable mystery to me. The reason that made Narayana choose me, a poor and unknown physician, as his heir. A mysterious smile glided over Nara's rosy lips. More than one reason influenced such a choice. Seeking a successor, Narayana wanted above all an honest man striving for occult knowledge. Moreover, he needed a man who was ill, whose blood could serve as a conductor of death. You fulfilled all these conditions, endowed, thanks to the life elixir, with the gift of clairvoyance. Narayana, from the first glance, seeing you in the theater, recognized that you were a thinker and a worker, for above your head blazed, like a fiery arrow, the astral light. All this, together with other reasons, which would take too long to list just now, determined his choice. You knew that he wanted to die, asked Supramati. I knew that he had to die. The moment he would choose for this interested me little. I did not in the least pity that criminal man who for centuries squandered his life essence on satisfying the basest appetites, and who used the gift of immortality not to elevate, purify, and develop his soul, but to vegetate among the vile beings he enriched with his gold. He, an initiate, found pleasure in the company of depraved creatures, and in the end reached the point of killing his mistress and poisoning his rival with a cigar. You said, Nara, that the life elixir gives clairvoyance. Why then do I not enjoy this gift? Supramati asked thoughtfully, because you have not yet developed all the abilities hidden within you. Today's conversation is our first lesson of initiation, the first step along the steep, wonder-filled path you are destined to take. But you are terribly pale and quite shaken, my poor friend. Let us leave aside the occult world with its mysteries for now and become simple mortals who love each other and long for happiness, like all the swiftly passing earthly beings around us. Nara added with a loving look, lowering her head on her husband's shoulder. Enchanted, Supramati immediately forgot all his doubts, fears and 1,000 questions tormenting him. Now he saw nothing but Nara's velvety eyes gazing at him with love and her smiling purple lips. Pressing her passionately to himself, Supramati murmured, "I love you, Nara, and I swear always to love only you and to have no other guide but you along the long life path I must traverse several days past like in an enchanted dream." Nara was so kind and tender that Supramati worshipped her more and more. Every hour spent away from her seemed to him like a theft of his own happiness. Nara herself seemed happy. She was amused by her young husband's love-stricken ecstasy when Supramati would say, kissing her, "Forget the past. Nara, forget your knowledge. Do not speak to me of mysteries or initiation. In this moment I wish only to love you and speak of love." Yet the impression produced by their conversation on the wedding day was too deep, and the vision of Narayana and everything he had heard about him had struck Supramati too strongly for him to forget it completely. Often he involuntarily began questioning his wife about various matters that remained unclear to him. One day, speaking of his visit to the glaciers, he remembered Agni and asked who that strange servant was. "He is one of the lower spirits, materialized by one of your predecessors, also Narayana Supramati," answered Nara. "I must tell you that a whole series of people bearing that name were libertines, but nonetheless good administrators and financiers, taking great care that the treasures they loved to squander should never be exhausted. One of the first Narayanas was especially inventive in that regard. Being an outstanding sorcerer, he used the elementals who obeyed him to dig and fill with gold the well you saw. For this purpose, he sought out treasures with which the world is filled and seized them. I do not know whether you are aware that every hidden treasure has guardians, imperfect and greedy spirits who jealously watch over and protect it, either because it was buried by them in life or for other reasons too long to enumerate now. With one particularly large treasure, the guardian spirit was Agni. Carried away by greed, he killed his master, the owner of the gold and precious stones later buried in the earth. But his crime chained him to the place where the fatal treasure was kept. When that Narayana wished to transfer this treasure to his own cache, Agni defended his hoard with such fury and energy that the man had to use all his power to overcome him. Nevertheless, Agni followed the gold and settled in the glaciers. That Narayana, who was as wicked a joker as the one you inherited from, found it very convenient to keep such a diligent guard and servant. To this end, he lit beneath the cache the perfumes mixed with essence which I have already mentioned to you. Under the influence of this life current, Agni became visible, tangible, and sufficiently alive to enjoy some of the privileges of the incarnated. In a word, he was a dual being, neither fully human nor a free spirit. And so he lives in the glaciers, guarding the treasure, for greed binds him to that gold, the mere sight of which brings him happiness. He is modest and obedient, fearing the power of his masters. He hates me, imagining, I know not why, that I will use my power to destroy his phantom existence. But his fear is completely unfounded. Was he to me? If he likes his miserable life, let him vegetate as long as he pleases. Such conversations, revealing to Supramati ever new abysses, greatly agitated and troubled him. The figure of Narayana, illumined by Nara's strange tales, began to take on fantastic and terrifying proportions. As soon as Supramati was alone, his mind was obsessively pursued by the memory of the man he had known so little and yet whose heir he had become. One evening, while Nara was occupied with a lady who had come to visit her, Supramati withdrew to the library, sorting through one of the drawers filled with letters, accounts, and the like mixed with ancient and precious manuscripts. He found a large medallion with Narayana's portrait on ivory. He was depicted in a rich and elegant costume of the 19th century. With curiosity and interest, Supramati studied this face of classical beauty. In the large black, night-like eyes lurked something demonic that fully matched the terrifying image that had gradually formed in his mind based on all he had heard about Narayana. How many abuses had he committed? How much suffering had he caused? What impermissibly frivolous game, with the dreadful powers entrusted to him, had this handsome youth allowed himself? A youth who looked like a living statue of Phidias. And what does he feel now? Was it hard for him to die after such a long life? Did he repent in the final hour? Suddenly, Supramati felt a strange sensation, as if warm gusts of air were streaming from his whole body. His breath became hot like fire, and a reddish vapor poured from his hands. At that very moment, a burst of laughter tore him away from his thoughts. From this deafening roar, an icy shiver ran through Supramati's body. He turned terribly pale, straightened up, and fearfully glanced around. Directly opposite him, along the bookshelves, some kind of shadow stirred. The shadow expanded, thickened, and wavered like a cloud of smoke. Then it suddenly took on clear outlines, and Supramati's eyes froze in understandable horror at the tall figure of Narayana, who stood a few steps away from him as if alive. He seemed taller and more emaciated than before. His face was deathly pale, animated only by his eyes, glowing like two burning coals, and fixed on Supramati with a terrifying gaze. "Give me your hand, Morgan. Give me a little warmth. I'm dying of cold," he said clearly, coming closer and extending his pale hand with its blue nails. Despite the involuntary terror inspired by this strange apparition, real and solid like a living man, Supramati had already raised his hand. His will was paralyzed by the glowing stare fixed upon him, a stare that crushed him and subdued him. Supramati's hand would have touched the hand of the phantom, but at that moment Nara appeared on the threshold of the room. In one hand she held a rod with several knots, in the other a small silver tray, which she quickly placed on the table. She swiftly stepped between her husband and Narayana and raised her rod. The phantom immediately wavered and retreated, emitting a hiss like a snake. Greenish flame burst from his wide-open eyes, and his face contorted in a revolting spasm. "Do not defile him with your touch," Nara said sternly. "You have received only what you deserved. Go and feed." The young woman pointed to the tray she had brought, on which stood a large glass of wine and a piece of bread with raw beef. Morgan watched in horror as Narayana rushed to the table, drained the glass of wine, and swallowed the bread and meat with astounding speed. As soon as the food vanished, the phantom began to fade and dissolve into a stream of smoke, which slipped into the fireplace, filling the room with a suffocating smell of decay. "Great God, but he's alive!" cried Supramati, who had silently watched this strange scene in amazement. Nara shook her head. "No, he has become a vampiric being, feeding on the life essence of others and feeling hunger and cold. He must be fed for a certain time, otherwise he will become even more dangerous. But come quickly. We must open the windows and cleanse the air. And you must take a bath at once to remove the impure fluids and emanations of decomposition you breathe, which will disturb you." And indeed, Supramati felt dizziness and a leaden heaviness throughout his body. Pale and shaken, he leaned against the wall. "Do not fear anything," said Nara, running her fragrant hand over her husband's damp forehead. "He cannot harm you. I sense his approach from afar and can restrain his malice. When you take your bath, we will walk in the moonlight to dispel this heavy impression." Supramati hastened to follow his wife's advice. But what he had witnessed had affected him so deeply that for several days the memory of Narayana's distorted and repulsive face pursued him relentlessly. It seemed to him that he saw the shadow everywhere. Yet the dreadful consequences of his predecessor's disorderly life filled him with pity and horror for the unfortunate sinner. Nara playfully teased him for his nervousness and tried in every way to amuse him. To erase the distressing impression, they spent more time than usual in society. And when they were alone, she told him so many interesting things from her long life that Supramati forgot everything and listened to her with admiration. However, she always evaded telling the story of her own life. One evening, when they were in an especially cheerful mood, Nara suddenly said with a mischievous smile, "But you behaved badly toward your friend, Viscount Lormel." "Not all. I gave him a large sum to pay his debts. He gambled away that trifle at the club, and your sly, unexpected departure caused him terrible trouble." Laughing wholeheartedly, she told him in detail the hilarious story of the headpiece and the scuffle between Lormel and Pierrette. Supramati laughed like mad and declared that if he had foreseen such a tragicomedy, he certainly would have helped the Viscount. "Nothing is lost yet. The Viscount is determined to find you and make you pay for your treacherous disappearance. I advise you to write to him, inform him of your marriage, and say that as you are leaving for several years, you want one last time to pay his debts on the condition that he settle down and not count on your help in the future. Your idea is excellent, my dear, and I will do it. Only, if you allow, I will send the Viscount our portraits." Nara pulled him by the ear. "Wicked boy, you want to pierce the heart of poor Pierrette with jealousy. She who had already been boasting that she would become a princess," she said mockingly. Supramati blushed and kissed his wife's hand. "I wasn't thinking of that silly creature. But tell me, Nara, how do you know everything that happens?" "I think with irritation and shame of what you could have seen if you had wished to watch my life. Calm yourself. I am modesty itself, and have never abused the ability to summon in the magic mirror images of past and present. But to know a little of what my fickle husband is doing, that is my undeniable right. Come now, do not despair. I have forgotten everything I saw. Tomorrow we will go to the photographer and sit for a portrait together." The Viscount had gathered a small circle of close acquaintances. Among others, Pierrette was there, though without Mercandeer. They were celebrating the reconciliation of the battling sides, and the actress was wearing the notorious headpiece, the cause of the fight. Dessert was already on the table when a servant brought the host a large packet from the post, and the Viscount opened it in astonishment. The packet contained a large photographic portrait and a letter. Hardly had the Viscount glanced at the letter and the portrait when he cried out loudly and enthusiastically, "Oh, incomparable friend, what a marvelous woman! What divine beauty!" Everyone hurried to see what so delighted the Viscount, and when they learned that Supramati had married and that he intended to pay his friend's debts, a triple hurrah was shouted in honor of the newlyweds. Only Pierrette, who had been chattering from the beginning about her supposed engagement to the prince and shamelessly lying that she had allegedly received from him a passionate note secretly delivered in a bouquet, was disgraced. At first she was speechless, then fell to the floor in a hysterical fit with piercing screams. so that she had to be taken home. The next day, the Viscount left the Rothschild banking house with a self-satisfied air, having come there with the prince's secretary, who had arrived from Venice for the purpose. Lormel named a sum double the true amount of his debts, and it was immediately given to him. Nevertheless, even the idea of settling down seemed ridiculous to him. First of all, he wanted Mercandier to pay him back. Learning from the banker that Pierrette was ill and seeing no one, he immediately went to her. The actress was indeed playing the role of an abandoned bride. If anyone had believed her words, he might have thought that Supermati had sworn eternal fidelity to her. But the Viscount spoke firmly to her and advised her not to sacrifice a good position for an unattainable dream. The prince was not suited to you at all, and to tell the truth, you cannot compare with his wife, he said. But Mercandier is mad about you. Marry him. You will become a baroness and be rich enough to deny yourself nothing. The advice came at the right moment for Pierrette's wounded vanity, and she resolved to use every means to become Baroness Mercandier as soon as possible. She wanted to prove to Supermati that she lacked neither suitors for her hand nor for her heart. In her foolish vanity, she did not realize that to the prince she had always been nothing more than a trivial amusement. Her efforts were quickly crowned with success, and 6 months later she celebrated her marriage to the Baron. The Viscount led her to the altar. Meanwhile, Supermati continued to lead his calm and enchanting life in Venice. He felt indescribably happy. Only when he remembered Narayana, the horrible vampiric being feeding his corpse with human food, a shudder ran through him. Have you been giving Narayana more food since the day I saw him eat? He asked once, when the memory of the repulsive apparition rose vividly before him. Of course. Every day, I place food for him in the study adjoining the library, Nara replied. Tonight we will go and watch him feed. The young man turned pale. He was ready to refuse when Nara said reproachfully, Aren't you ashamed, Supermati, to let your nerves run away with you? This is a weakness you must overcome, because I warn you, during initiation, you will have to see things far more terrifying than this pitiful larva. To know what spirit you are dealing with, you must see them, look at them calmly and bravely, and acquire the energy necessary to subdue these wicked and fearsome creatures. Supermati was ashamed to admit that terror made his hair stand on end. Besides, he understood that Nara was right, and that sooner or later he would have to conquer his fear and weakness. Very well, I will go with you, he said hesitantly. You may go without fear. In my presence, Narayana is powerless. Moreover, we will not enter the study, but will look through the window that opens onto the gallery. The study in question was of medium size and formed a corner of the palace. One window looked onto the canal, and the other on the opposite side onto the gallery that stretched along the wall. A little before midnight, Nara came for her husband. They walked silently to the gallery and stopped at the window, or rather, the open embrasure without glass, through which the whole room was clearly visible. Through the tall Gothic window on the opposite side, the moonlight streamed into the study and illuminated it almost like an electric light. One could clearly see the old darkened wood carvings, the high-back furniture, and the slightly faded embroidery of the heavy velvet curtains. In the middle of the room, on a small table, stood the food for the phantom. The silvery moonbeams lit the tray and the crystal plate on which lay the bread and the piece of raw meat. Feeling the nervous trembling that shook Supermati's body, Nara pressed his hand firmly. Be brave, my dear, she whispered. Tonight you undergo the first trial of initiation. You must first conquer fear, which gives the spirits of darkness power over you, whereas calmness and courage subdue them and bring them under your dominion. Supremacy was unable even to reply. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and an inexpressible horror and loathing shook his whole being, and he nervously pressed Nara's little hand against himself. At the same time, he struggled bravely with himself to overcome this weakness and forced himself to look at the table where the vampiric creature was supposed to appear. Suddenly, a black shadow appeared in the window opening and blocked the moonlight. At that moment, the ancient palace clock struck midnight. Soundlessly, with feline agility, the specter jumped into the room and approached the table. Trembling with terror, Supremacy looked at Narayana's tall figure, clad in some strange black-gray garment resembling a leotard that outlined his thin and slender limbs. In the moonlight, his pale face appeared even more death-like. His deeply sunken eyes burned like two coals. A reddish phosphoric glow lit his forehead and made it possible to see two small curved horns protruding from the mass of thick black hair. With animal greed, he threw himself on the food, devouring the meat and bread. But at that moment, he apparently felt that he was being watched, for he raised his head and directed an infernal gaze at the two observers. A repulsive grin twisted his pale lips. In this mutual staring, a second passed, but it seemed an eternity to Supremacy. Then the specter made a forward movement, as if preparing to rush at them, but a shining snow-white cross immediately appeared before him and blocked his path. Narayana shrank and stepped back. He seemed to lack air, and a hiss reminiscent of snakes came from his half-open mouth, and from beneath his raised lips, white wolf-like sharp teeth showed. And the shining cross kept moving forward, pushing him back toward the window, and the specter retreated, backing away, almost crawling. Suddenly, with the same feline agility, he straightened up, leapt onto the windowsill, and disappeared outside the window. Supremacy's head was spinning, and the ground seemed to slip from beneath his feet. Then it seemed to him that he was falling into a black abyss, and he lost consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he saw that he was lying on the gallery floor. Nara was kneeling beside him, supporting his head and making him smell a damp handkerchief emitting a pleasant and reviving fragrance. Supremacy straightened up quickly and muttered, blushing with shame, "Forgive me, Nara, for my unworthy weakness. Truly, I do not know what happened to me. You have nothing to apologize to me for," she replied with a kind smile. "Sometimes one simply cannot control one's nerves, but in time you will learn to master them. One learns this as one learns any other knowledge. A time will come when the visit of such a gentleman will make no impression on you at all, and it will be enough for you to raise your hand to make him flee. And now come, we will have supper too, and then go to bed, for you need rest." In spite of these consolations and Nara's cheerfulness and attentiveness, Supremacy remained silent and looked worried. At night, he could not sleep and kept thinking about what had happened in the evening. He could not forgive himself for losing consciousness from fear when Nara, a woman, not only remained calm, but had overcome the evil spirit through her knowledge and will. He did not wish to lag behind his wife. However horrible the specter Narayana might be, he wanted to grow accustomed to looking at him without shuddering. Since he was destined to penetrate this world of shadows and subdue it, he must bravely set to work, conquer himself, and no longer blush before his own wife. Because of this resolve, he wanted the very next day to witness Narayana's supper again, but the specter did not appear either that day or in the days that followed. Chapter 13. One day after lunch, the young spouses sat alone in Nara's small drawing room. Torrential rain was falling. It was cold and damp. In a large marble fireplace, a cheerful fire blazed, warming the cozy room. They sat side by side on a little sofa and gazed thoughtfully at the fire. Suddenly, Supramati remarked, "This evening seems made for a frank conversation. You know everything about me, yet I still await the moment when you will tell me, as you promised, the story of your life." Nara leaned back against the sofa and closed her eyes. Silence reigned, which Supramati did not dare to break. Finally, she straightened up. "Very well," said Nara. "I will tell you the story of my life, of that long life whose beginning is lost in the darkness of ages. And will you not fear such an old wife afterward?" Supramati laughed. "Oh no, all youth could envy your kind of old age. But it seemed to me that it is unpleasant for you to summon the past. If so, then do not tell me anything, my dear. The present gives me so much happiness that I ask for nothing more. You are right. I must call forth heavy and terrible memories. But still, never mind. I myself want you to know my life. Those events are so distant that they should produce no impression on me. Yet, by a strange property of the human soul, everything it has once lived through, felt, and suffered is immediately reborn when one summons the past. Centuries disappear, and we relive forgotten sensations. I was born in Rome, in the year 202 before the birth of Christ. The Second Punic War had just ended, but despite the Republic's victory, the country was exhausted and many families had suffered severely. My father, Marcus Licinius, commanded a legion. Badly wounded in one of the battles, he was forced to leave military service and settled permanently in Rome, in a modest house near the Forum. In that era of strict morals, civic virtue, and ardent patriotism, Rome was not yet a city of palaces, mad luxury, and colossal wealth as it later became, and its citizens were proud of their austere simplicity, as in Caesar's time, they were proud of their refinement and opulence. Although my father was wealthy, he lived very modestly. He was a stern soldier, made gloomy and withdrawn by family misfortunes. His first wife, Fabia, bore him 5 sons, of whom 4 died in childhood. Only one, my brother Caius Licinius, survived and became the idol of my father. After 3 years of widowerhood, my father fell in love with a young patrician woman, fair-haired like myself, and married her. My birth cost my mother her life, and despite his love for her, it seemed that my father felt some bitterness toward me for having caused the death of the woman he worshipped. I grew up alone under the care of an old Greek slave, Euryclea. This good woman adored me, indulged me in every possible way, and taught me her language, knowledge of which became fatal for me, as you will later see. I had just turned 6 years old when an event occurred that determined my fate. My brother Caius fell ill, and so seriously that they feared for his life. My father was in despair. The threat of losing his only 17-year-old son on the eve of the day when he was to don the toga of manhood nearly drove him mad. Father himself nursed Caius, and one day, falling asleep at his bedside, he had a dream that decided my destiny. He dreamed that he stood in the temple of Vesta. By the altar stood a Vestal virgin in whom he recognized me. As I tended the sacred fire, the goddess herself appeared from the flame. "In exchange for your daughter serving at my altar, I will grant life to your son," she said. Then, placing her hand on my head, she disappeared. My father then saw on the altar steps a grown Vestal and me, a 6-year-old child. Father took this dream as a command from the immortals, especially since he had seen it on the eve of the day when the high priest chooses a novice. Without the slightest hesitation, my father went at dawn to the high priest and told him that he voluntarily dedicated me to the service of the goddess Vesta and in addition offered valuable gifts to the temple. Everything happened according to his wish. A few hours later, a green vestal wreath adorned my head, and in the atrium regium my fair curls fell under the scissors. I remember that moment perfectly, though I did not yet understand its importance. I was saddened only by the separation from good Euryclea and my father. As if to confirm the truth of my father's dream, my brother recovered. I settled in the temple, and my 10 years of novitiate passed quietly. When I grew up, my beauty became remarkable. Men, women, and children stopped to look at me when I, preceded by lictors, passed through the city in a chariot or litter. Meeting the beautiful Vestal Licenia was considered a lucky omen. Among the young citizens and officials who respectfully lined up as I passed, more than one cast upon me a glance full of passionate admiration. I, however, was cold and indifferent to all. I now understood the terrible responsibility my position placed upon me and had grown accustomed to a strict life, gladly performing my service to the goddess. I enjoyed watching the sacred fire during the long, silent nights. Even then, it seemed to me that I saw various shadows gliding beneath the temple's vault. I saw my father often enough. It seemed to me, though he never expressed it, that in his heart he regretted having sacrificed my life. All the more so because this sacrifice did not yield the fruits he had hoped for. My brother lived, but his fragile health prevented him from serving in the army, and his marriage for many years remained childless, to my father's great sorrow. In the atrium of the Vestal's house stood statues of those virgins who had particularly distinguished themselves by their virtues or beauty. My father decided to add my statue to this collection. With the consent of the high priest, he invited a Greek sculptor who was then in Rome and enjoyed great renown. One room of our house was temporarily turned into a workshop where the artist was to work on my statue for several hours each day. One morning, my father brought the sculptor, whose name was Creon. He was a handsome young man of about 30. Seeing me, he stood for a moment as if stunned. In his eyes shone such an expression of passionate admiration that I blushed and lowered my gaze. And Creon pleased me at first sight as no man ever had before. Creon quickly recovered and with feigned indifference set to work. While he kneaded the clay and Corda, the old Vestal whose duty it was to be present at all sessions, busied herself weaving garlands to decorate the goddess's altar, I began examining Creon and comparing him with the young Romans I knew. In this comparison, all advantages were on the Greek side. Ancient Romans, for the most part, were not distinguished by beauty. They were of medium height and robust build. Their characteristic faces were angular, and their heads were covered with curly hair. Creon, however, was tall, slender, and supple as a reed. Thick blue-black curls framed his white and delicate face of pure Greek type, and his dark blue eyes were full of tenderness and charm. Except for this expression and the blue eyes, he resembled Narayana in many other respects, and the more I looked at him, the more he pleased me. One day it occurred to me to tell him that I spoke Greek. He was delighted, and we began to talk. Only a little, it is true, since Corda disliked it, but still enough to get to know each other better and break the first ice. Creon always found a chance to slip in a word and furtively cast glances at me that made my heart beat violently. Once I noticed that Creon had set his tools on the table behind Corda, and as he went to fetch one of them, he suddenly stopped and stretched out both hands toward the old Vestal, fixing on her a burning look. Under the effort of his, the veins on his forehead swelled. I watched him in amazement. But what horror seized me when I saw Corda close her eyes and fall asleep, letting her head drop against the back of the wicker chair. Creon, are you a sorcerer? I whispered. Why are you doing this? Creon quickly came up to me. Because I want, if only for a moment, to remove this bothersome witness and tell you, Licinia, that I cannot live without you and that I long to kiss your sweet lips just once. His eyes burned with passion. Before I had time to say a word, he embraced me and kissed me fervently. Then, pretending to work, he told me that he worshipped me and that if I returned his feelings, he would free me from the terrible life in the temple with the help of one of his friends, an Indian sage who had already taught him how to put Corda to sleep and who would give us the chance to flee. I agreed to everything. At that moment, the life of a Vestal filled me with real terror. We agreed that in a few days he would again put the old Vestal to sleep. Creon awakened Corda, and to my greatest astonishment, she neither remembered nor even seemed to notice that she had slept. From that day, we had several more such talks, and Creon told me that the Indian had promised him his help and that we would escape on his ship as soon as it arrived at Ostia, but that we must arm ourselves with patience for several months. When the statue was completed, it aroused universal admiration. My father was so delighted that he ordered a second copy for the house of the Vestals. As for the finished statue, it was immediately carried into his atrium. Now, Supermati, if you wish, I will show you this statue. What? You have it? Cried the astonished young man. Yes, I have it. From the rest of my story, you will learn how it came to me. Kulme. Nara rose, went into her room, and, approaching a large mirror, pressed a spring. A hidden door flew open in the wall. They entered a dark chamber, and the door immediately closed behind them. Then an electric lamp flared on the ceiling, and Supermati saw that he was in a large, round, windowless room. In the middle, on a high pedestal, stood a statue of white marble bathed in electric light. A cry of admiration escaped Supermati's lips. Only the hand of a great artist, guided and inspired by love, could have created such perfection. Life seemed to quiver in that marble. The half-opened lips smiled, and the deeply carved eyes gave the full illusion of large, dark eyes looking at the viewer. Beneath the wonderful, unusually delicate and soft folds of the tunic, one sensed the classical form of the young body. The artistically draped veil seemed so fine and transparent that it looked like real fabric. Overcome with emotion, heart trembling, Supermati gazed at the statue. It seemed strangely familiar. The same phenomenon occurred as when he had first seen Ebermar. In that moment, in his mind, with even greater force and in an inexplicable chaos, rose visions of unknown cities, rooms, and faces. Struggling to suppress this unbearably heavy feeling, Supermati immersed himself in contemplating the statue's face. Yes, it was Nara's face, feature for feature, and yet there was some difference he could not define. Had she grown thinner, or had her expression changed? She lacked the charm that breathed from that marble face. Nara, it is you and not you, he murmured. Nara, leaning thoughtfully against the wall, shuddered and straightened. It is true, I am Nara, but no longer Licinia. My features no longer reflect the carefree innocence of true youth, and I lack that freshness of a whole soul that has forgotten the past, knows nothing of the future, and, even beneath a Vestal's veil, innocently enjoys the present. Now, despite my beauty, my eyes reflect the bitterness of centuries lived. I have lost the most precious gifts of life, enjoyment of the present and hope for the future. I do not forget the past, and its wounds and sorrows remain forever alive. I know the future and have lost the ability to enjoy the present, just a fleeting ray between the past and the future. And now let us go. I will continue my story, for I wish to finish it today. Would it not be better to continue it here? I see a chair and a little bench, and I would be happy to sit at your feet. It will be doubly pleasant to hear your story while looking at this marvelous work, which seems strangely familiar and simply enchants me. A pensive smile passed over Nara's lips. Let us stay, she said simply. We shall summon the past in the presence of this silent witness of distant events. When they had taken their seats, she continued, I have already said that my father ordered Creon to make a copy of my statue, and he set to work. But since he worked in the workshop my father had arranged at his own house, it became difficult for us to meet. Yet love is bold and resourceful. Sometimes the sculptor would come to bring an offering to Vesta when I was on duty, and we arranged meetings in the garden. For Creon had become so daring as to climb over the forbidden wall at night, and I was so blinded as to break my vow of chastity. Drunk with love, I did not suspect that destruction already hung over my head. One rival discovered my secret. This rival was Ogolnia, a young Vesta like myself, but less beautiful and disliked for her harsh character. She had long envied me and, to complete my misfortune, had fallen in love with Creon, though of course she carefully hid this feeling. Jealousy must have made her perceptive. Whether she noticed one of the sculptor's passionate glances or intercepted one of the little scrolls he managed to give me 2 or 3 times, I no longer remember. But in any case, she discovered the truth and, to ensure my ruin, chose an ally doubly dangerous to me. This ally was a priest known for his severity and strictness. Yet this 40-year-old man secretly harbored a burning passion for me. In his dark, stern eyes, I'd caught a flame that left no doubt of his feeling. But he hid it under a mask of double severity. One night, when all were asleep, as I thought, and I alone watched the sacred fire, Creon came to me. He announced that our escape was near and that the Indian friend had informed him that in 12 days we could leave Rome and begin a new life in Greece. Happily, I fell into Creon's arms. Then we sat down on a step and spoke of the future, when suddenly cries rang out. The light of torches filled the sanctuary, and I saw approaching us the chief Vestal, Manlius the priest, Ogolnia, and the other Vestals. I stood as if paralyzed. Creon leaped out and disappeared into the dark garden. I was immediately arrested and thrown into a dungeon as one caught in a crime for which a Vestal must pay with her life. Usually judgment was passed at once, but I was kept in confinement for more than a week before I was brought before my judges. Later I learned that the reason for this delay was Creon's disappearance, as if he had vanished into the earth, and whom Manlius sought with fury, wanting, according to custom, to execute him on the same day that his accomplice would be buried alive. At last I appeared before the tribunal of priests gathered in the Regia. I could not deny my transgression and several misfortunes that had occurred in the city, a fire caused by lightning, the death of an aedile and several citizens drowned while crossing the Tiber by boat, and so on, were blamed on me, for according to the high priest, they were sent because I had made offerings to the goddess with unclean hands. I was unanimously condemned to be buried alive. The priest removed from me the sacred bands, the veil, and the linen tunic of the vestal. Then I was led into a dark dungeon where I was to spend the last day and night of my earthly life. Nara paused. Her eyes grew dim and her lips trembled. The memory of those hours of torment was clearly overwhelming her. Supramati did not dare break the silence. He understood what she must have suffered then, if even after so many centuries she could not speak of that past without shuddering. He only bent over silently and kissed her cold hand. The young woman shuddered and straightened. This weakness always overcomes me when I think of what I endured then, she said, trying to smile. Then say no more. Skip that episode, Supramati said gently. Nara smiled and shook her head. No, it is only a foolish weakness. Besides, this civil death was the foundation of my entire later existence. So I continue. After midday, the high priest came to my dungeon and, according to the law, beat me mercilessly with rods. He might have been merciful, but on me they avenged the disappearance of Creon. Yet another, completely unexpected mercy was shown to me. That night my father was admitted to bid me farewell. He had turned gray and aged 20 years. He uttered not one reproach, but for the first time in my life, I saw him weep. I was terribly shaken and, throwing myself into his arms, burst into bitter tears. The presence of the chief vestal at our meeting prevented us from speaking openly. Only when parting did my father press me several times to his chest and suddenly whisper in my ear, "Break the bread they will leave for you in your grave, and hope." My heart stopped. So, they meant to try to save me. As mad as such hope was, it supported me in my misery and soothed both my mental anguish and bodily suffering. All night, I did not close my eyes, but pride upheld me when, at dawn, they came to dress me in mourning garments and then led me into the courtyard to be placed in the funeral litter. At the sight of the dreadful black litter, the executioner, the lictors, and all the surrounding horror, I weakened and fell back with a cry of despair. They seized me and placed me in the litter, and I had to wait while they piled pillows around it, apparently, so that my cries would not reach outside and disturb the people. But I no longer cried. I cannot convey to you what happened to me then. My soul seemed to tear itself from my body. There was a roaring in my ears, and icy cold seized my limbs. But strangest of all was that it seemed to me as though the darkness around me dispersed, the walls of the litter vanished, and I saw the forum filled with a silent, solemn crowd. For one moment, I even saw the funeral procession and the black litter in which I lay. Then the vision disappeared, and I, weak and shattered, found myself again inside the litter and felt its steady swaying on the bearer's shoulders. At last the procession stopped, and I felt the litter set down on the ground. When I stepped out of it, I saw that we were at the place designated for executions. From the small elevation on which I stood, I could see thousands of heads swaying far around, but the crowd seemed seized with some silent horror. I myself saw everything as if through a fog, all the more since I was wrapped in a large veil that covered my face. The high priest approached me and, raising his hands to the sky, uttered the secret prayers specifically appointed for such a funeral rite. Then, taking me by the hand, he led me to the prepared tomb and placed me on the first step of the staircase leading down, after which he withdrew. Almost instinctively, I threw back the veil covering me. I wanted for the last time to look at the sky and breathe fresh air. My last glance fell on the high priest, departing with a priestly cortege. Then, seeing the executioner wanting to take my hand and force me to descend, I recoiled in horror and went down by myself. On the last steps, I saw that a lamp was burning in my grave, standing beside a couch covered in black. Seized with inexpressible grief and terror, I stopped. My head spun, darkness clouded my sight. I must have fainted and fallen down, for I remember nothing of what happened afterward. How the ladder was pulled out and the tomb sealed. How long I lay unconscious, I do not know. When I opened my eyes and returned to awareness, I found myself in a rectangular vault 5 or 6 steps in length and width. Near the couch, on a stone table, a lamp burned. Beside it lay a large loaf of bread, an amphora of water, a pot of milk, and a small supply of oil. The thick and suffocating air of that dreadful place oppressed my breathing. My head burned, my temples throbbed. I tore off the veil and the heavy mourning tunic. Then, with a trembling hand, I broke the bread. Inside it was some hard object, which proved to be a crystal flask filled, it seemed, with a colorless liquid. The flask was wrapped in a small piece of papyrus on which I managed with difficulty to make out the following words. Search on the wall opposite the couch for a brick marked with a triangle and remove it. Hope, even if you must wait long. If you feel yourself very weak, drink the contents of the flask. Feverishly agitated but filled with new hope, I began feeling the wall and soon found the indicated brick. Removing it was far more difficult, but at last I managed, discovering that the wall concealed a hollow space. I removed several more bricks and opened a deep niche containing a large basket. Trembling all over, I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were 2 amphoras of wine, one of oil, dried fruits, bread, honey, and a large piece of roasted beef. With these provisions I could, of course, live for a week. The main thing was that I could keep the lamp burning. But would I not suffocate in this grave, where breathing was already difficult? I cannot describe to you what I suffered and how I endured the time that followed. The air grew ever heavier, the provisions dwindled, the oil neared its end, and the promised rescue did not appear. My hearing grew painfully acute, and it seemed to me that I heard distant noises, blows of a pick, and muffled voices. The thought that a tunnel was being dug to reach my tomb gave me courage, and I tried to be strong and patient, but at last my sufferings exceeded my strength. Dizziness overtook me. I suffocated, torrents of exhausting sweat drenched my body. The lamp threatened from one minute to the next to go out for lack of oil. And still no rescue. Clearly, the plan conceived for my salvation could not be carried out, and foreseeing this failure, I had been given the flask, containing no doubt some subtle poison to spare me the agony of starving to death. The moment had come to use this merciful gift. My head felt clamped in iron pincers. I could not get enough air. Glancing at the lamp, I saw it would burn no more than half an hour, and to die in darkness was even more terrible. With incredible effort, for my head spun so violently I could barely stand, I poured the remaining wine into the crystal cup I found in the basket, poured the contents of the flask into it, and drank it all at once. It seemed to me I had swallowed fire. My whole being seemed to fly apart into atoms. I whirled in a black abyss. What happened afterward I do not remember. When I recovered and opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor in absolute darkness. At first I could not understand where I was. I remembered nothing of the dreadful drama of my life and felt fresh and strong. Stretching out my hand, I groped around and touched something cold. It was the stone table. The touch brought back my memory, and a cry of mad despair escaped my lips. So I had not died. What I drank had not been poison, and despite everything, I was doomed to die slowly the most horrible death in this dark grave. I cannot understand how I did not go mad in that terrible moment. One thought possessed me: to die at any cost and as quickly as possible. I tried to tear a strip from my tunic to strangle myself, when suddenly I clearly heard blows coming from a niche. This time I was not mistaken. Bricks were being removed in the recess. Then a beam of light entered the tomb, and on the wall appeared the shadows of two enormous hands widening the opening. Deliverance had come. Joy and emotion deprived me of speech. Trembling all over and overwhelmed by sudden weakness, I sat on the ground, watching what was happening. At last the niche was cleared, and through the low, narrow opening slid a man wrapped in a dark cloak. He held a lantern in his hands. Thinking he was Creon, I cried out in joy. But when my rescuer placed a lantern on the table and threw back the hood covering his head, I saw he was a stranger whose majestic beauty filled my heart with admiration and reverence. The stranger was taller than Creon. His bronze face had the classical purity of a statue. Thick black curls and a short wavy beard framed it. In his large dark eyes burned a fire that was hard to endure. His gaze with a strange expression glided over me. Then he said in a pleasant, sonorous voice, "Poor child, your execution is over. Calm yourself and dress quickly in the clothes I brought in this bundle. We must flee, and we cannot lose time." With these words, he turned away, and I quickly dressed in the costume of a simple boy. "I am ready, only I don't know what to cut my hair with," I said in a trembling voice. The stranger turned and looked me over with a smile. "You are quite a little boy," he said cheerfully. "It would be a pity to cut your hair, in which a moonbeam seems to have lost itself. Tie it at the back of your head and put on the hood of the cloak. Yes, good. Now follow me." He entered a narrow underground corridor where one could walk only bent over. We walked very long. In my impatience, it seemed the gallery would never end. At last we emerged into a ruined hut locked with a strong door. The stranger took a spade from a corner and filled the entrance to the gallery with earth. In a few minutes, all traces were completely erased. Then he extinguished the lantern and we went outside. We found ourselves in a field, and as far as I could judge, quite far from the city walls. It was night and the weather was terrible. The wind howled and the rain poured as from a bucket. I walked with difficulty, stumbling on stones and slipping in puddles. Then my guide lifted me in his arms and carried me. After an hour's walk, we reached the bank of the Tiber, where a covered boat with 4 rowers awaited us. Several hours later, I boarded a large ship anchored at Ostia. The stranger led me to a cabin furnished with oriental luxury, where a richly set table stood. "Refresh yourself, then go rest. Rest is necessary for you," my rescuer said, seating me in a soft chair and pouring a cup of wine. I drank the wine and ate. Looking at my rescuer, who served me, spoke to me, and seemed very cheerful, I felt deep gratitude toward him. I wanted to throw myself at his feet, kiss them, and thank him for saving me from my dreadful fate. He seemed to me beautiful as a god. When he smiled, his face took on a particularly enchanting expression. When I finished eating, he clapped his hands. A young black girl immediately appeared. "Here is a maid who will give you women's clothing and attend you throughout our journey," he said. "And now, farewell. Sleep and rest." I very much wanted to ask him where and when I would see Creon, but I did not dare. Thanking him for his kindness, I followed the girl, who led me to another, no less luxurious cabin. Putting on fresh clothes, I lay down on a soft couch and fell asleep. Our journey lasted whole weeks. It seemed so long to me that at times I thought I was doomed to travel the rest of my life. I saw my rescuer only after 3 or 4 days. He would appear on deck when I was allowed to come out for fresh air, or he would have me dine with him. Several times our ship put into harbor and stayed for days. But then I did not leave the cabin. Sometimes we left the ship and traveled several days on land, then again boarded and continued our route. The more often I saw my rescuer, the more I listened to his always interesting and instructive conversations that opened before me new and wide horizons, the more I admired and revered him, and the more the image of Creon faded in my heart. When I sometimes caught in my benefactor's dark eyes an expression showing that I pleased him as well, my heart began to beat violently. But I always told myself that I must not hope for anything, that the criminal priestess of Vesta, the shameless woman who had broken her vow of chastity, was unworthy of the love of this lofty man. I now knew he was a sage who lived sometimes in Alexandria, sometimes in Athens. When once I ventured to ask him about Creon, he answered, "He is safe, but I cannot take you to him unless." He gave me a probing look. "You yourself demand it and wish to abandon me." I shook my head in denial and fell silent. I did not want to leave him. It seemed to me that as soon as I was no longer under his immediate protection, I would once again fall into the hands of my persecutors. One day the ship stopped again. At dawn, the young black girl told me that her master had ordered me to dress up. She took from a basket, she brought clothes whose cut and fabric I had never seen before. They were made of silk and gauze embroidered with pearls and diamonds. And in the basket, there were also jewels of incredible value. When I put on this strange costume, the black woman covered my head with a large transparent veil and led me out onto the deck. And the scene that unfolded before my eyes tore from me a cry of admiration. The land that appeared to my sight seemed like a wondrous garden, for I had never before seen palm trees, nor had any idea of the luxuriant vegetation of the tropics, and I could not take my eyes from the huge bright flowers, from all that astonishing nature, and from the elephants and the crowd of people gathered on the shore. In the distance, I saw numerous houses, no doubt belonging to some city, and a huge building whose roofs and domes towered above everything else. The arrival of my protector tore me away from my contemplation, and he too had changed his clothing. Instead of the simple linen tunic, he now wore a silk garment. His neck and arms were adorned with jewels, and on his head was a kind of muslin turban with weapons sparkling with gems tucked behind his belt. A boat brought us to the shore, and amid loud shouts and cries in a language I did not understand, we seated ourselves in a gilded palanquin fixed upon the back of a white elephant, whose neck, legs, ears, and even trunk were decorated with precious stones. As in a dream, I sat beside the stranger whom I had begun to think of as a king, and the procession moved on. I was so confused and agitated that everything danced before my eyes. The strange vegetation, the bronze-skinned people with flaming eyes, and our entire procession. I retained only a vague memory of this first journey through India, and only when we halted before a vast building that proved to be a pagoda was my attention captured by the strangeness of the architecture and by the many-armed, many-legged statues that seemed to me like human spiders. The sight of the bayadirs and of the naked or mutilated fakirs made a deep impression upon me. We left the palanquin, my protector took me by the hand, and we entered the pagoda, where priests and singers whom I took for priestesses received us. They led us to an altar on which burned a fire with fragrances. They sprinkled us with water and made us drink honey and eat rice with saffron. The stranger placed a ring on my finger and then, lifting me in his arms, carried me 3 times around the blazing fire. Only my complete ignorance and the turmoil I was in prevented me from understanding that a marriage ceremony was taking place. Leaving the pagoda, we once more took our places in the palanquin and went to a palace surrounded by an enormous garden, far more magnificent than the palace of Narayana in Benares. There I was received by women and led into a splendid hall decorated with such luxury that I was literally dazzled. Everywhere were gold, enamel, jewels, and fabrics I had never seen, all covered with embroidery. Through a wide arch as delicate as lace, I could see a garden with fountains and flower beds, over which fluttered butterflies and tiny birds that looked like living jewels. To me, who had known nothing but the poverty of Rome in that time and been raised in the severe simplicity imposed on Vestals, all this wealth and beauty seemed like an enchantment, and I even began to wonder whether I had died in my tomb and whether my soul, forgiven by Vesta, was now visiting the blessed fields. Night had already come when my Savior entered. He was walking quickly, and his eyes burned with unconcealed love, and later I learned he had presided over a great banquet given in honor of his return and of his marriage. One thing tormented me, to learn at last the truth. Falling to my knees, I stretched out my hands to him and murmured, "Tell me, who are you and where am I? Tell me, am I dead or alive? What does all this mean that I see here?" The stranger laughed merrily and carelessly like an ordinary mortal. He lifted me up, seated me beside him on a divan, and said, fixing upon me a gaze that positively scorched me, "You are in India, my homeland. I am Raja Vivishvata, and you are my wife. Did you not understand that in the temple I placed the blessed ring on your finger and shared with you the consecrated rice and honey? Oh," I murmured, "you chose me, the unworthy and guilty priestess. One of the most human and lawful feelings forced you to break the law, and you paid for this crime with terrible sufferings. Creon is more to blame than you. I promised him my help and advised him to behave prudently and to treat your position with respect until you were far from Rome. But instead of following my advice, he abandoned himself to his passion so far that he broke into the sacred enclosure and forced you to violate your vow of purity, exposing you and himself to the danger of disgraceful death. With great difficulty, I saved him, and he is now safe in his homeland, but he has lost you and fully deserved this punishment. So forget the past. It is erased and no longer exists. The justice of the Temple of Vesta is satisfied. The Vesta Lycinia is dead, and you are now Nara, my wife. Your courage, your obedience, and your repentance have made you worthy of my love. I listened as though in a dream, and happiness and gratitude toward the man I saw as a beneficent deity filled my heart. I seized the hand of Ebramar, the sage of Athens and Alexandria, and pressed it fervently to my lips. "Ebramar," repeated Supramati, rising to his feet, "is it possible that the man who saved you and the sage Ebramar whom I saw in the Himalayas are one and the same?" "Yes, it is he. Having seen him, you will better understand why I loved him with a most special feeling in which respect and admiration played as great a part as love. But calm yourself, sit down, and listen to the end of my tale." When the agitated Supramati again took his place on the stool, Nara continued, "From that day on, my life flowed peacefully without the slightest cloud. It was like a magical dream filled with love and study. Ebramar, I shall call him by this name familiar to you, gave me my first understanding of occult sciences. I think no teacher ever had such an attentive and devoted disciple. seated at his feet in the great laboratory. I listened to his lessons and studied ancient languages. I know the Sanskrit of the Vedas, the Assyrian tongue, the ancient dialects of Asia, the Egyptian language, and I can even read hieroglyphs and cuneiform inscriptions. Ebermar was a kind and patient teacher, but very strict. He demanded diligence and perseverance, for I was to progress and not remain fixed in place. I did not notice how time passed. The further my studies advanced, the more my interest awakened in the unfolding mysteries of past and future. One day, when we were working together in the laboratory, as usual, Ebermar drew me to him and said, Lycinia, would you like to go to Rome and see your father? He is very old. His death is near, and I promised him he would see you before he died. This almost forgotten name, which embodied such terrible memories, made me tremble, but at the same time aroused in me an intense and painful desire to see my poor father again. Of course, I would like to see my homeland and my father, but I'm afraid someone will recognize me, and I will again be exposed to the vengeance of the law. I murmured in agitation. Ebermar burst into loud laughter and then asked with a mischievous smile, How much time do you think has passed since you left Rome? 10 years or so, I answered with slight embarrassment. Ebermar continued to laugh. Your answer, Nara, once again proves that for those who work, time has wings. 40 years have passed since the sad drama in which you were the heroine. Your father is 98, and you are 57. I cried out in horror. I was thus a complete old woman, and yet it seemed to me I had not changed at all. I looked at Ebermar. He was still the same 30-year-old young man who had saved me. Not a single gray hair silvered his black, raven-like locks. His gaze was full of fire, and the suppleness of his limbs revealed youth in its full bloom. Ebermar read my thoughts and answered with a smile. Do not worry. It is not vanity that blinds you. You are truly young and beautiful. He took from a cupboard a mirror made of some special substance, more perfect than ours, for until then I had only used metal mirrors. Trembling, I looked at my reflection and saw that indeed I had not changed at all. Now you see for yourself, said Ebermar, that you have nothing to fear from Roman justice. Lycinia should be a gray, stooped, and wrinkled matron, not a lovely creature with a sparkling gaze in the full bloom of 17 years. Ebermar, what miracle has occurred with me? Does science truly possess the secret of eternal youth? I exclaimed in great agitation. The time will come when you will know everything, he said. Now begin packing. In 3 days we're leaving for Rome. I will not describe our journey in detail. In Alexandria, we again put on Greek attire, and as an Athenian sage, Ebermar landed in Rome with his wife Eucharisa. A man sent ahead had already rented a house, and everything was prepared for our reception. You can imagine with what feelings I passed through the very streets along which I had been carried to death on a funeral bier. The impression of this memory was so strong that cold sweat broke out on my skin, and I almost lost consciousness. The day after our arrival, Ebermar told me that my father had been informed and that after midday, I could go to him. Entering the room, I saw an old man seated in a chair, so emaciated that he seemed like a living skeleton. Beside him stood another stooped old man with a gray beard and wrinkled face. His eyes seemed familiar to me, but I had no time to sort out this impression since both uttered a muffled cry when I threw back my veil. My father was so moved that he leaned back, and I thought he was dying. Falling to my knees, I embraced him and covered him with kisses. At last he opened his eyes, took my head in his hands, and looked at me, weeping. Having somewhat calmed himself after the double shock of seeing me again after so many years, and young and beautiful, he pointed to the other old man, who stood silently leaning against the wall with his face buried in his hands. Look, do you not recognize him? It is Creon, he added quietly. Deeply moved, I went to Creon, held out both my hands to him, and murmured, "Do you not want to see me?" Creon straightened himself and, looking at me with an expression of bitterness and despair, answered, "It is painful to see you. I am a bent old man, while the gods, moved by your beauty, have given you eternal youth. While the grief caused by losing you bent my back and whitened my hair, the happy traitor lived with the woman I loved, whom he had promised to give me and whom he stole from me. A dishonorable man, he had everything, and took from an unhappy man his only treasure, condemning us, me and your father, to complete loneliness," he added, clenching his fists. "You are unjust and ungrateful." I replied sternly, "To whom, if not him, do we owe our escape from a terrible and shameful death? If you had been more patient and prudent, we would have fled together, I would not have been a criminal, and everything would have turned out differently." Creon paled and lowered his head. This silent grief awakened pity in me. I approached him and kissed him. "Forget and forgive what is irreparable. Let us be friends and thank the gods for granting us the mercy of seeing each other." At last, we all calmed down. My father told me that after my release, he had received only one laconic note from Ebermar: "She is saved." Several years passed, and he had received no news of me. During this time, my brother Caius died, and my sister-in-law married a second time. Believing that perhaps I was living in Greece with Creon and afraid to give news of myself, my father went to Athens, where he found Creon. He also knew nothing of me, but treated my father with filial love and surrounded him with tender care. They grew attached to each other and lived many years together in Greece. Feeling the approach of death, my father wished to see Rome again and die in his own house. He returned to Rome with Creon, whom no one recognized, as more than 30 years had passed and the old story was forgotten. A few days later, Ebermar also visited my father and reconciled with Creon. The years calmed the impetuous sculptor, and besides, he felt that most of the guilt lay with him. Only gratitude remained, which helped him forgive. From that day on, Creon began to fade quickly. In 3 months after my arrival, he was found dead near the statue of the Vestal. On the pedestal of this statue he had written, "Creation of my hands, joyful ghost to the happiness of my youth. To you, my last thought. She, whom I carved from marble, loved me and belonged to me. Her beloved features were my consolation." The inscription can still be seen today. After my father's death, which followed a few weeks after Creon's death, I left Rome and took the statue with me. Since then, this precious memory has never left me and follows me everywhere. It seems to me a real link connecting me with the distant past. Nara fell silent, and a few tears ran down her velvety cheeks. Meeting her husband's sad and melancholy gaze, she tried to smile. You see, despite immortality and all knowledge, the stubborn human heart cannot overcome the grief of parting from loved ones and the memories of endured hardships. "Nara," murmured pale Supermati with a trembling voice, "your story has stirred in me sensations and images unfamiliar to me. I would say almost memories and experience feelings. But all this is so chaotic and incomprehensible. They say souls reincarnate and live in new bodies. But in that case, who am I, Nara?" He sees his wife's hand. You know this. Dispel this darkness and illuminate my soul. Nara's eyes flashed. She leaned forward and placed her hand on her husband's forehead. A moment later, she whispered, Creon, do you remember the happy hours for which we paid so dearly? Like lightning, her words pierced Supramati's mind, and a heavy veil fell from his eyes. Suddenly, he saw the temple of Vesta, the altar on which the sacred fire burned, and the white figure of the Vestal lying in his arms. In that moment, he experienced all the happiness and longing of the past. Gasping, he pressed his head to Nara's knees, and she caressed his dark hair with her hand. Now do you understand why you, and no one else, became the heir of Narayana? Ebermar, though late, kept his word and returned to you your beloved woman, young and beautiful. As then, she captivated your heart. Throughout all your various existences, he remained your protector. Hence comes that feeling of love, reverence, and trust that overcame you upon seeing Ebermar. Understand. Now I understand much, murmured Supramati, straightening and wiping the sweat from his brow. Only one thing remains dark to me, your marriage with Narayana. How? Loving Ebermar, could you yield to him? It was a human infatuation for which I paid dearly, Nara replied with a sigh. That is how it happened. As Ebermar advanced to the peak of pure knowledge, his love for me became ever more spiritual. Perhaps he even regretted deep down that he had taken me from you. In any case, when he reached the highest steps of initiation, he renounced relations with a woman, and we had a part. He rose high, and I, despite fragments of knowledge, remained the same passionate, jealous, and proud woman, and this separation seemed to my limited, ignorant mind unjust and cruel. All the bad feelings still hidden in my soul, and I was then an impetuous and passionate woman, boiled within me. And instead of following Ebermar's advice and dedicating myself to science, I committed an incredible folly, binding my life to Narayana. He came on behalf of the Brotherhood, saw me, and was inflamed. I, under the influence of anger and malice, received his courtship favorably. He resembled you, adored me, and I agreed to unite with him in the grotto that serves as the dwelling of our brotherhood. Later, I returned to Ebermar, broken and unhappy, to acquire power and superiority over my unworthy husband. I passed, under the guidance of a mage, the first steps of the highest initiation. This was self-defense, not liberation, since I voluntarily threw myself into the world of trials and temptations. But for today, that is enough. You're terribly pale and upset. Your soul has endured too strong a shock. Let's go. I will give you calming drops that will induce sleep and restore the balance of your body. Not wishing to listen, Nara led her husband, gave him the drops, and made him lie down. Supramati awoke late. Physically, he had completely recovered, but the impression left on his soul was so strong that in his conversations, he always returned to his wife's story, admired the statue for hours, and avoided all society. One evening, when the conversation again turned to the past, Supramati declared that he passionately wished to begin his initiation as soon as possible. If you are sure that you will not regret worldly life and all the pleasures you have not yet fully enjoyed, then who hinders you from summoning to here? Nara replied with a smile. Oh, I have no regret for the world. Only with you can I not part. The very thought of leaving you deters me from working on initiation, observed Supramati, passionately drawing Nara to him. Just think, having barely found you, losing you again, We will not part. The lower initiation does not require it. I will live with you in the sanctuary of knowledge and labor, participate in your works, and be your assistant or advisor when moments of weakness occur, and they are inevitable. In that case, let us go at once. I'm not frightened by any seclusion with you, nor will I retreat from any labor, Supramati exclaimed joyfully. Nara laughed. Enthusiast, remember that haste is a sign of imperfection. Let us go. I agree. Only allow me first to prepare you a little for what awaits you. Much courage is needed to cross the threshold of the invisible world. First, I want to open your eyes and show you what surrounds you. For this, I will let you inhale substances that sharpen and activate the latent astral abilities in your body. If you were a mere mortal, I could not risk this. An ordinary man would go insane or at least suffer brain inflammation. But you're guaranteed against death and disease. Even the soul is partially affected by the elixir of life. In any case, you must prepare to endure a very strong shock. Do you want me to inhale this substance today? No. For this experiment, we will choose a crowded gathering. For example, the day after tomorrow, Count Raka will celebrate his daughter's engagement with a grand ball. It is a perfect occasion. When you are fully dressed, come to my laboratory and you will see for yourself. Interested and slightly anxious deep down, Supramati eagerly awaited the day of the ball. Having finished his toilette, he went to Nara's room. She was waiting for him, and dismissing the maid, led her husband into the laboratory, at the center of which stood a tripod with burning coals. Sit and patiently wait for what will happen, she said with a smile, seating him in a chair. Fanning the brazier, Nara threw some dry herbs on the coals, then, taking a small box with a golden lid, scooped a little white powder and sprinkled it on top. Instantly, a large flame flared with a crackle, shimmering in all the colors of the rainbow. The laboratory filled with a whitish vapor and a suffocating aroma, causing Supramati to feel dizzy. A nervous tremor shook him, and a painful chill ran over his skin. Overcome by a heavy drowsiness, he closed his eyes and lost consciousness. Nara's voice called him from oblivion. Supramati shuddered, straightened, and opened his eyes. At that moment, a muffled cry burst from his lips, and tearing the embroidered silk cloth from the table by which he sat, he rushed to his wife, shouting, "Great God, you are burning." Nara laughed loudly. "Do not be ridiculous, Supramati. You see not fire, but astral light. You can touch it without burning your fingers." Embarrassed, Supramati stopped. A calmer examination convinced him that Nara was surrounded by a wide halo of phosphorescent light, resembling fire and constantly changing colors. With ever-growing amazement, he saw that beams of light radiated from her entire body, from the left side, red, and from the right, blue. Above the young woman's forehead, aflame in the shape of star-burned. Rays of white light emanated from her eyes and fingertips. Even her clothing, she wore a white satin ball gown adorned with flowers and lace, and her jewels were coated with phosphorescent dust. Supramati was entirely absorbed in observing this strange spectacle, trying to explain it to himself, when suddenly his attention was drawn to some unfamiliar faces, whose fixed, piercing gaze produced an unpleasant and repelling impression on him. Where did these people come from? We were alone here, he said with displeasure. Nara laughed again. They have always been here. You just did not see them. These are atmospheric beings with whom people everywhere encounter, yet deny their existence with an aplomb that is very comical to one who does not share their ignorance, blind and vain. But let us go. Time to depart. Above all, remember that you are now clairvoyant and refrain from inappropriate exclamations. Silently, Supramati followed his wife through a long series of rooms to the front hall. Everywhere moved a crowd of beings of the most diverse appearance. Some were transparent, with calm and stern faces, floating, wrapped in white airy tunics. Others were heavy, compact, with gray or black faces and terrible gazes. They were dressed in ancient or medieval costumes, and some were completely naked, but these were covered with wounds or disfigured by sores. All this invisible society inspired in Supramati an indescribable aversion. The sight of the servants bustling around their masters and escorting them to the gondola struck him once more. Besides the coloring half blue, half red, which seemed inherent not only to all living beings but also to inanimate objects, the lackeys, Swiss guards, and gondoliers were all surrounded by blackish-red halos, and from their eyes, hands, and mouths rose orange smoke with an unpleasant odor. The sight of the invisible world surrounding Supramati absorbed all his attention. From all sides silently glided a preoccupied crowd, which seemed to have its own affairs. Here and there animals ran about. From the water of the canal appeared pale and suffering faces, looking at them with curiosity or hostility. "And these are all dead?" murmured Supramati, feeling oppressed. "Ah, do not speak such nonsense," Nara said, half laughing, half angrily. "Are they dead? These are spirits, and not even visions, for they always truly exist. They are constantly here, mingling among the incarnated." The gondola stopped at the illuminated portal of the Raka Palace, interrupting the conversation. The young couple entered the hall, already full of guests. Never before had Supramati felt so heavy performing social duties and listening to or replying to banal phrases addressed to him, without revealing the excitement the occult scene unfolding before his eyes caused him. Mixed with the living moved a crowd of disembodied, and among both occurred very strange things. At first, the young doctor was unable to make sense of this chaos. From all sides intersected rays of red, orange, smoky gray, or black, an inexpressible mixture of pleasant aromas and the smell of decay created a thick and suffocating atmosphere in which it was difficult to breathe. From the heads of the living, like arrows, flew yellow, blue, green, red, smoky, and slightly crackling flames. Often one or another of these fiery arrows fell on a neighbor or interlocutor, causing a kind of burn that the latter unconsciously felt. Thus, Supramati saw how they flinched and brought a hand to their head or heart, as if feeling pain. Above the heads of some swirled black, smoky vapors, and the spirals of this smoke enveloped them like a clouded mantle, through which the face and body seemed to take on the appearance of a corpse. "What does this mean?" Supramati whispered fearfully into Nara's ear. "These are people who are soon to die and who are very attached to matter. I will give you a more detailed explanation later. For now, just look and observe." Supramati, horrified yet seemingly enchanted, watched this strange and terrifying scene unfolding on all sides. Shadows with dreadful gazes moved there. Others were pale and appeared suffering. There were also those who had no definite form but clung like large black spots to the living. Only the eyes burning with malice, phosphorescing within this formless mass, indicated that these were thinking beings. There were the unfortunate who carried several such spots. Every time Nara approached such a being and her pure, bright, and warm fluid touched it, The black spots seemed to stir and hide under the skin. The person began to feel a painful state and hurried to move away. Seeing some ladies, Supremati shuddered when he saw that they were covered with something like leeches, at first glance blood red. But then he realized these were the bodies of tiny children. For Supremati, it was a true test of courage and presence of mind to laugh and converse with strangers while his heart beat painfully and sweat of horror appeared on his forehead. At moments, the occult noise seemed so deafening that he could hardly hear questions addressed to him. Later, when Supremati and his wife approached the buffets to refresh themselves, he saw with disgust that the crowd of disembodied was much denser than the living. Pale faces with greedy and covetous expressions leaned over the food. They seemed to cling to the mouths of those eating, as if wanting to snatch a piece or at least breathe their breath. Among this disgusting crowd, Supremati saw Narayana, who had attached himself to a very young girl, beautiful and fresh like a newly blossomed flower. The warm and purple aura surrounding her indicated health and an abundance of vitality. The vampire ghost inhaled the emanations of life with pleasure, enveloping the young girl like steam with his black emanations of decay. Look how he is tormenting this poor child. But I will cut off all his relations with her immediately, Nara whispered, watching the young girl, who seemed to feel very unwell. Her eyes blazed, her gestures were impetuous, and her face alternately flushed and paled. As if wanting to show something to her husband with the tip of her fan, Nara raised her hand. Instantly, lightning shot from her fingers and, like a flame, passed between Narayana and his victim. The ghost recoiled, as if struck with a whip, and then, casting a poisonous glance at Nara, disappeared into the crowd. The young girl drew a deep breath, as if freed from some invisible burden. Everything Supremati saw completely destroyed his appetite. In general, he felt terribly exhausted by the effort required to conceal his feelings. Therefore, he expressed a desire to return home, citing a severe headache. As they passed through the hall toward the exit, Supremati asked Nara in Sanskrit, "Explain to me the meaning of this double coloring of people and things in red and blue. These intersecting multicolored rays, the flames emanating from heads, and finally these disgusting black and especially red parasites attached to the men and women we pass by. You demand from me a whole treatise on occult science," she replied with a smile. "For now, I will answer briefly. But to understand me, you must know that everything we do, feel, and think is tangible substance, emanating from us with its vibration, color, and aroma, according to its more or less pure chemical composition. The multicolored rays are the fluidic currents of the body. The flaming arrows flying from heads are human thoughts, colored according to the motives that generated them. In other words, thoughts of hatred, jealousy, and ill will striking the one at whom they are directed cause invisible wounds. A thought directed consciously and with mighty will can kill, like lightning. Moreover, everything you see leaves an image on the astral plane, whose receptivity is incredible. Look at this chair, just vacated by an old man. You see a sort of grayish aura remaining, exactly depicting him. You can even recognize his facial features. Such an image of our personality, our deeds, and thoughts, the ray of the past carries into the eternal archives of space. Already sitting in the gondola, thoughtful and worried, Supremati suddenly asked the young woman, "You have said nothing to me about our double coloring, nor about the black and especially red parasites. which are even more disgusting and resemble small children. Oh, what you call double coloring is simply human polarity. Our body, like our planet, has poles. The North Pole gives blue currents, the South red. You may also notice that the stronger the subject, the brighter the coloring. As for the black parasites, these are lower, material, and impure spirits like Narayana. They cling to the living belonging to their category that is also material and devoted to all passions. These parasites feed on the life essence of their victims and, through them, enjoy pleasures they crave but cannot satisfy personally. Great God, how disgusting and horrible all this is. How much impurity and evil I have seen today, and so little good. It seems as if it does not exist at all. A gathering like the one we just left is more likely to attract evil than good. It mobilizes all material appetites and all bad passions. You felt the vibrations and odors of impurity with which this depraved, envious, and evil crowd is saturated. In a few days, I will take you to another place, from which you will bring away a more pleasant impression, and where you will see what kind of appearance purity, harmony, and fervent, pure aspiration to the Heavenly Father create. Where is this blissful place? Supramati asked with curiosity. It is a small and poor monastery on the outskirts of Venice. I know the abbot of this community. He is a strict, pious, and impeccable man, and the monks are worthy of their abbot. Many who have suffered ruin in life have found peace in this monastery, which fully fulfills its true purpose, to be a refuge of prayer and mercy. Despite his impatience and curiosity, Supramati rose too late the next morning to make the proposed trip, as Nara wished to attend Mass. The following day, they rose early and arrived at the monastery at the beginning of the service. The monastery was old, blackened with age. Its small church, in Gothic style, with stained glass, black oak benches, and darkened icons, had a sad and mysterious appearance. Sounds of the organ and pleasant singing echoed under the vaults as the young couple entered the church and silently took seats on a bench. There were few people, just a few old women and children, and 2 or 3 beggars praying prostrate on the floor. All of Supramati's attention focused on the monks seated on either side of the choir. These people, with strict, pale faces and inspired gaze, seemed absorbed in ecstatic prayer, having forgotten the world around them and renounced it. All these people seemed to be covered with light whitish mantles. From their tonsured heads radiated bundles of sparkling light. The same light, like silvery rays, emanated from their lips. Phosphorescent sparks hovered under the vault. All this light, drawn like a magnet, accumulated before the altar into a vast hearth of light and warmth. Shimmering clouds swayed rhythmically, at times completely covering the cross and the image of the Savior with a diamond cascade. An inexpressible feeling of happy tranquility and striving toward God filled Supramati's soul. Only the deep and harmonious voice of the priest celebrating Mass disturbed the profound silence of the holy place. Yet Supramati felt as if the entire atmosphere emitted a gentle and pleasant harmony beneficial to the soul. Deeply moved, Supramati leaned toward his wife and quietly asked her, "What does this flame and these diamond-like clouds moving before the altar mean?" "This is the prayerful fluid, the pure radiation of a soul that has materialized its longing for the deity. You will understand the benefit of this hearth of light and warmth, this emanation of sung and fervent hearts, as a counterbalance to darkness and sin, When you see the effect it produces on suffering beings, on those sick in body and soul, Nara replied, just as quietly. Increasingly intrigued, the agitated Supremati began observing the invisible spirits, which were far more numerous than the incarnated. Transparent beings, wrapped in snow-white veils, with strict and serene faces, formed the majority. Their luminous hosts were grouped mainly around the altar, and they seemed to participate in the prayer. But there was no shortage of suffering spirits with darkened astral bodies and expressions of grief. They too prayed and tried, as much as they could, to approach the hearth of light. At that moment, a new figure entered the church and stopped near the bench where Supremati and Nara were seated. It was a thin and pale man of middle age. His face, marked prematurely with wrinkles, bore traces of heavy suffering. His gaze burned, yet was confused, his walk hesitant. He slowly dragged himself to a dark recess near the altar and, kneeling, covered his face with his hands. "Watch this man and see what happens around him," Nara whispered, squeezing her husband's hand. "Do you see the black smoke, streaked with lightning? Do you hear the tearing whistle and moans disturbing the silence and melodic vibrations of this holy place? I see disgusting shadows clinging to him, seemingly trying to drag him away. On the other side, a white, luminous figure bends toward him and restrains him. But tell me, what does all this mean? This is an unfortunate man who has suffered greatly. He lost his family, wealth, and health, and did not endure these misfortunes and deserved trials with faith and humility, a repercussion of mistakes he once committed. He railed against God, blasphemed, and cursed. These evil feelings gave power over him to wicked and impure spirits, who tormented him, stole his last peace, and drove him towards suicide. The white shadow beside him is his wife, whom he loved and lost. She loved him too. She, in despair over his mental state, brought him here to pray for him. Agitated, Supremati watched the strange group gathered in the recess with curiosity. The man continued kneeling, apparently exhausted but oppressed and downcast. The white shadow prayed beside him, emitting a fiery current that joined the hearth of light surrounding the image of the Savior. Suddenly, a radiant wave separated from this bright center and bathed the unfortunate man in light. The black shadows retreated, and the shining vapor seemed to penetrate the sinner's body. The tearing echoes of his bitter feelings, his complaints and despair, gradually subsided. The life-giving warmth of the prayer evidently acted upon the wretched man, calming him and restoring him. Suddenly, he straightened, stretched his hands toward the altar, and murmured, "Lord, support me, forgive me." Bright flames shot from his head, and at the same time streams of tears poured down his face. The dark spirits vanished. Confused and moved by everything he had seen, Supremati left the church, the refuge and support for all the suffering. "Yes, Supremati," Nara said, shaking his hand, "no prayer is lost, and none is ever in vain. No impulse of faith and love, rising from the human heart, remains fruitless. Like a beneficial seed, this spark of divine fire hovers in space or gathers in places devoted to prayer, and as soon as the opportunity arises, descends upon a suffering, troubled soul unable to pray. The invisible medicine placed in space by another penetrates the soul of the sufferer, relieves him, strengthens him, and often saves him from irreparable madness. The man you saw will also leave the church calm and full of energy for life and struggle. Oh, what would become of humanity if such hearths of light did not exist? Have you not seen for yourself that harmony and peace create a right and pure life, which also has its charm? Returning home, Supermati began to complain of pain and dizziness. It is time to rid you of clairvoyance, Nara remarked. To see everything, one must prepare for it and cleanse the eyes with the astral power of one's purified being, not with the stimulating means I gave you. Even for your immortal body, the mighty vibrations of the invisible world are too strong. An ordinary organism would be destroyed if its own blindness did not serve as a sturdy armor. During the initiation, you will spiritualize the matter of your body and see what occurs in space without suffering. Drinking what Nara had given him, Supermati fell asleep. When he awoke, he was fresh and calm, but the invisible world had vanished from his sight. His physical eyes no longer perceived anything, though the memory of the terrible and wondrous visions hidden in the transparent air around him remained vivid in his mind, constantly reminding him of the importance of spiritual life. Carnal pleasures, worldly enjoyments, petty vanity, and wealth all paled and lost their interest. Supermati wished to powerfully enter the invisible world of shadows, shed matter, and develop all the capacities of his soul to strive toward the great light filling the universe. Before him arose God, boundless and incomprehensible in his wisdom and power. This was not the God of earthly man, limited to childish understanding, but the being of beings, the mighty breath of the universe, propelling its creation toward a distant and mysterious goal and governing, by the same immutable laws, both myriads of atoms and myriads of worlds, an innumerable number scattered through infinite space. Under the influence of such thoughts, Supermati expressed to Nara his desire to immediately begin his initiation, and she agreed without the slightest hesitation, advising him to choose a castle in Scotland for his studies. It is a very secluded place. There is a laboratory, and everything is perfectly arranged for the studies you wish to undertake, Nara remarked. I will gladly go with you. I have long grown weary of empty social life and do not regret it. On the contrary, I am even pleased to have the opportunity to work on improving and developing my astral power. Resolving this, they both actively prepared for departure. Supermati quietly attended to his affairs and arranged for the maintenance of his various estates and the palace in Venice, which would always be ready to host them. Nara prepared, in a separate room whose key she always carried, a supply of dried blood, bread, wine, salt, and honey. One evening, Prince Supermati and his wife Nara quietly left Venice, taking only one maid and Tortosa with them. With a heart filled with the fear that makes living people shudder when encountering the occult, yet with a brave soul, Ralph Morgan set out for his castle in Scotland. What awaited him in the unknown future and the mysterious fate that had transformed him from a humble doctor and a sick man condemned to death into Prince Supermati, immortal and a future disciple of the mages.